This is the story air travel doesn't want you to hear. It was Flight 347 from London Heathrow to New York, JFK. Boarding had just begun, but the real turbulence started not in the sky, but on the ground. A brilliant, ambitious young man, David Holloway, finally achieved a dream. A first-class seat. But that dream was shattered instantly by a chorus of cruel laughter from the very crew meant to serve him. They thought they were invisible. They thought their words wouldn't matter. They were wrong, because when they least expected it, a familiar, terrifying figure stepped onto the jet bridge and saw everything. The price for their arrogance, immediate, public, and absolute termination. The air in the first-class cabin of the Boeing 727, operated by the prestigious Atlantic Airline, was a symphony of hushed luxury. Soft, indirect lighting bathed the individual suites in a warm amber glow. The seats, more like plush private cocoons, were upholstered in expensive Italian leather. Everything smelled faintly of clean linen and expensive cologne. At Gate 42 of London, Heathrow, the first-class boarding had been announced, a polite, almost reverent call reserved for the airline's most valuable passengers. Among the small line of tailored suits and designer luggage, one figure stood out, not for what he wore, but for the quiet, almost giddy excitement that radiated from him. David Holloway was a sharp, focused 18-year-old, dressed in a crisp, but not overly expensive, navy blue sweater and dark slacks. He clutched a worn leather satchel. This wasn't a business trip. This wasn't a splurge. This ticket, seat 1A, was a gift, a scholarship bonus from his acceptance into the highly selective computer science program at Columbia University. His parents, immensely proud, had pooled every spare penny, along with his scholarship funds, to upgrade him for this monumental journey to his new life in America. He felt the weight of that sacrifice, a mixture of responsibility and pure joy. David handed his boarding pass to Sarah Jenkins, the lead first-class flight attendant. Sarah, a woman in her late 40s with a meticulously maintained blonde bob and the practiced, slightly weary smile of someone who had seen it all, scanned the paper. Her smile faltered. Her eyes, which had been scanning David's appearance with a casual, dismissive speed, snapped back to the ticket information displayed on her small handheld device. 1A, Mr. Holloway, she stated, the inflection in her voice slightly off. It wasn't rude yet, but it was certainly colder than the greetings she'd given the impeccably dressed older gentleman ahead of him. She handed the ticket back quickly, her fingertips barely brushing his. David, too preoccupied with finding his assigned suite, barely registered the shift. "Thank you, Mum," he said, his voice earnest. He proceeded down the carpeted aisle, past the galley. As he settled into the immense luxury of seat 1A, a private self-contained suite with a sliding door, he pulled out his phone, already drafting a text to his father. "I'm in. It's incredible. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you." Meanwhile, back in the galley, Sarah leaned in conspiratorially toward two other crew members. David Stern, a handsome younger flight attendant known for his sarcastic wit, was preparing a tray of pre-departure champagne. Beside him, Brenda O'Malley, a reserve attendant covering the first-class section, was polishing glassware. "Did you see that?" Sarah muttered, nodding subtly toward the front of the cabin where David's door was still slightly ajar. David chuckled, a low, grating sound. "The young man? Yeah. Looks a little, lost. Thought he'd wander into the premium economy bathroom by accident." Brenda giggled, covering her mouth. "He looks like he's just won a contest. Are we sure that ticket isn't a typo? 1A is normally reserved for the regulars, like Mr. Harrison." She named a well-known, high-frequency flyer. Sarah scoffed, wiping down the marble effect counter aggressively. No, it scanned fine. Holloway. God knows how he got it. Probably a deeply discounted employee family pass he's not supposed to be using this far up, or a credit card points miracle. Look at the bag, she added, her voice dropping lower. It's old. He's definitely not one of us. David poured a flute of Dom Perignon, swirling it theatrically. Well, I guess we'll just have to teach him the first-class etiquette, won't we? Don't want him ruining the ambience for the genuine clientele. Don't touch the noise-cancelling headphones with your fingerprints, Holloway. He mimicked a sharp, instructional tone which made the women laugh harder. Their laughter, unprofessional and loud, echoed slightly off the metal surfaces of the galley. David, blissfully unaware, was still texting his family. He shifted his satchel onto the floor by his feet, and his motion happened to pull the door to his suite shut, not fully locking it, but closing it enough to block the sightline. The door chime signaling the final call for boarding sounded. A passenger, a middle-aged woman named Flora Vance, was walking past the galley toward her own suite in the middle of the cabin. She had already settled her handbag and was heading back to ask Sarah a question about the Wi-Fi. As she paused a discreet distance from the galley opening, she heard David say, with pure, unfiltered contempt, "Seriously, you put him in 1A? It's not a bus. Next thing you know, he'll be asking if we have fried chicken on the menu. He needs to move that old backpack." A sharp, collective burst of laughter followed. Sarah chimed in, "Just make sure he doesn't spill his juice on the wool carpet, David. Insurance forms are a nightmare." Flora Vance froze. She was a quiet, unassuming woman, but she was a meticulous observer. She saw the trio, Sarah, David, and Brenda, their faces alight with shared malice and privilege. She saw the direction they were looking, and she knew exactly who they were talking about. Disgusted, Flora decided her Wi-Fi question could wait. She retreated quietly to her seat, but she did not forget the faces or the exact words. The incident was a sour note in the otherwise perfect opening of the flight. What the flight crew didn't know was that the very final passenger to board, who had been delayed due to a last-minute high-level security meeting, was approaching the jet bridge. Charles Chuck Sterling was a man who didn't fit the stereotype of an airline CEO. He was quiet, almost invisible in a perfectly tailored dark suit. He traveled without the fanfare of an entourage, preferring to observe the true function of his operation, the people, the passengers, and his employees, without the performance that his presence usually elicited. He was a stickler for customer experience and employee conduct, believing that the crew was the literal face of his multi-billion-dollar corporation, Atlantic Aero. As he stepped onto the jet bridge connecting the gate to the plane, he spoke softly into a secure phone, concluding a finance call. He was heading for his usual anonymous transit seat, a designated staff jumper tucked away at the very back of the aircraft, ensuring no one would recognize him until he was deep in the heart of JFK's operations. He reached the aircraft door just as his phone call ended. He paused, inhaling the unique smell of jet fuel and clean cabin air. He was about to step past the main entry galley and head to the rear of the plane when the sound of unrestrained laughter reached him. It was loud, it was unprofessional, and it was coming from the first-class galley, the supposed zenith of Atlantic Aero's service. Chuck Sterling stopped dead in his tracks. He didn't enter the cabin fully. He simply stood just inside the airlock, observing the main entry area where the first-class service begins. He saw 3 flight attendants huddled, and he saw their faces contorted with an ugly, shared amusement. He didn't hear the exact words, but the tone, the body language, and the direction they were looking, toward the front passenger cabin, were damning enough. Suddenly, Sarah's voice, raised in indignation, pierced the silence. "Mr. Holloway, that satchel cannot be on the floor during takeoff. It's a trip hazard. And please, don't use the full recline button until after we've reached cruising altitude. You are aware of the procedure, aren't you?" Chuck Sterling watched as David, flustered, quickly pulled his bag onto his lap and offered a mumbled, "Sorry, ma'am." He saw the crew exchange a silent, knowing look of contempt. The CEO of Atlantic Aero, Charles Sterling, reached for the back of his neck, his fingers tightening. He felt not just irritation, but a cold, heavy sense of betrayal. He was about to interrupt when the captain's voice crackled over the system, announcing the imminent pushback. Chuck had an urgent financial meeting in New York and was deeply needed on the ground. He realized he could not make a scene now. Instead, he made a silent decision. He would not intervene yet. He would let the flight continue. He would observe, and he would let their behavior be their own undoing. Charles Sterling, the Atlantic Aero CEO, slipped silently through the galley and down the long, empty aisles of business and economy class. He knew the layout of his planes intimately. He found the small, unmarked crew jumper seat hidden near the aft lavatories. It was cramped, anonymous, and perfect for observing the true operational rhythm of the flight without the mask of formal authority. He settled in, pulled out his secure tablet, and began typing. Not a business email, but a meticulous log of the incident. Entry: LHR JFK, Flight 347. Crew: Jenkins, Lead FA, Stern, O'Malley. Incident: observed unprofessional conduct and passenger contempt during boarding process, approximately 1945 GMT. Target: passenger, seat 1A, Mr. Holloway. Behavior noted: public shaming, unwarranted instruction regarding seating protocol, 1A is fully reclinable on the ground for comfort, and confirmed derogatory remarks heard by the crew member himself. He knew he needed irrefutable proof, not just his testimony. He closed the tablet and decided to remain absolutely silent, a ghost in the machine. Back in the first-class cabin, the doors were sealed and the aircraft began its gentle pushback. David Holloway, humbled but still excited, tried to settle into the sheer luxury of his suite. He was ready for the promised pre-flight drink, the personalized service that came with this ticket. Sarah Jenkins and David Stern began their rounds. They offered champagne or juice to the other first-class passengers. Flora Vance, seat 2C, Mr. Alistair Finch, seat 3A, a prominent lawyer, and Mrs. Beatrice Roth, seat 4B, a wealthy philanthropist. Each was met with professional warmth, personalized greetings, and immediate service. When they reached David in 1A, however, the air chilled. David paused outside David's suite, avoiding eye contact. "We'll be serving the drinks shortly, Mr. Holloway. Just juice for now, during pushback." He didn't ask what David wanted. He simply assumed and moved on without waiting for a reply, leaving David with a polite but firm sense of exclusion. A few minutes later, Sarah returned, carrying only one glass on her small silver tray, orange juice. She placed it sharply on the built-in side table. "There you are," she said, her voice crisp and devoid of any real warmth. She then turned and walked directly over to Mr. Finch in 3A, offering him a choice between several vintage wines and engaging him in a prolonged, cheerful discussion about his destination. David just stared at the juice. He was an adult and had planned on asking for a sparkling water, but he felt a strange, suffocating pressure, the kind that makes you afraid to speak up, lest you confirm their unspoken judgment of you. He accepted the juice in silence, the joy of his ticket slightly dimmed by the crew's palpable disapproval. 2 seats back, Flora Vance watched the interaction from the corner of her eye. She was already sipping her own sparkling water, having observed the disparity in service. Flora was a retired journalist, keenly attuned to human drama and injustice. She pulled out her own discreet notebook, not a smartphone, but a small, unassuming, leather-bound journal she carried for observations. She dated her entry and began writing in careful script, detailing the selective neglect. 1A was served OJ without being asked. Other passengers were offered a selection of wines, champagne. Service is professional towards everyone but 1A. It is subtle but consistent. I believe this confirms the contempt I overheard in the galley. She knew that documentation was key. She was preparing a mental case file, not because she was looking for a confrontation, but because she recognized a fundamental moral failure in the service industry, treating paying customers differently based on appearance or perceived wealth. Once the aircraft leveled out at cruising altitude, the dinner service began. David was thrilled. He had sneakily looked up Atlantic Aero's first-class menu online and was excited to try the highly rated Wagyu beef. David approached him with the tablet used for taking meal orders. He didn't offer a traditional paper menu, which was a subtle slight. The physical menu allowed the passenger to peruse the high-end offerings at their leisure. "Dinner order, Mr. Holloway," David announced perfunctorily. David, determined to be polite and upbeat, said, "Oh yes, I believe I'd like the Wagyu, please." David scrolled through the options quickly, his finger hovering near the screen. "I'm afraid we ran out of the Wagyu. Only have the sea bass and the vegetarian pasta tonight." David frowned. "Oh, really? It's just the start of the service, isn't it?" David offered a tight, false smile. "Highly popular dish. Very limited supply. Perhaps you'd like the pasta?" David, feeling the pressure, defaulted. "The sea bass, then." "Thank you." As soon as David walked away, he walked directly to Mr. Finch, 3A. David heard him say clearly, "Mr. Finch, thank you for your patience. Tonight we have the Wagyu, the sea bass, or the pasta. Which exquisite selection may I tempt you with?" Mr. Finch chose the Wagyu. David's stomach churned. He looked out the window at the vast, featureless Atlantic, the small, isolating space of his suite, suddenly feeling very cold. They hadn't run out. They simply didn't want him to have it. It was a deliberate, petty lie, designed to make him feel like an afterthought. Later in the flight, after the dinner service, David got up to use the luxurious first-class lavatory, a perk of the cabin that included designer soaps and towels. When he returned, his seat was subtly different. His reading light had been inexplicably turned off, and the small amenity kit containing high-end toiletries and pajamas had been pushed slightly out of sight under the ottoman, as if Brenda had hastily swept it away during a superficial tidying. More notably, the small bottle of $150 designer water, which had been resting in his drink holder when he left, was gone. Instead, a generic, sealed bottle of airport vending machine water sat in its place. David said nothing. He simply switched his reading light back on, retrieved the amenity kit, and tried to ignore the swap. He had never been high maintenance, but the continuous, low-level hassle was beginning to feel like psychological warfare. At the back of the plane, Chuck Sterling watched the flight logs and the cabin calls on his tablet. He saw the inventory system updated by the first-class crew. Wagyu beef count, 4 servings remaining. Yet, he had heard the announcement over the service microphone that the Wagyu was sold out. He cross-referenced the seat assignments. He knew David Holloway had been refused the dish. This was no longer just rudeness. This was operational misconduct, outright deception, and discriminatory service aimed at making a customer feel unwelcome. Chuck's quiet fury intensified. He didn't want to terminate people without cause, but the cause was mounting exponentially. He had one final piece of confirmation to gather. He checked the flight manifest again. Sarah Jenkins, the lead FA, was listed with an internal note. Final disciplinary warning issued 4 months prior for unauthorized use of premium inventory, stealing high-end liquor. This crew wasn't just arrogant, they were repeat offenders, shielded by their years of service and the fast-paced nature of the job. Chuck sent a single, encrypted message via his tablet to his executive vice president of operations, Robert Caldwell, who was waiting at JFK, code Alpha 27, LHR 347. Prepare for immediate crew debrief upon arrival. Hold crew at secure airside facility C. Do not release them. I have the evidence. The flight was nearing its destination. The drama was about to land. As Flight 347 began its descent into the evening glow of New York City, the atmosphere in the first-class galley was relaxed, even smug. Sarah, David, and Brenda were finishing their post-service cleanup, their voices low but cheerful. "Well, that was painless," David remarked, stacking the last of the expensive porcelain coffee cups. "Little Holloway in 1A didn't peep once after I got rid of that hideous satchel." "He was quiet as a mouse," Sarah confirmed, applying a touch of lipstick in the reflection of a polished cabinet. "They always are when they realize they're out of their depth. He drank his cheap juice and ate his fish." "Exactly as expected." Brenda giggled. "Did you see the look on his face when you told him the Wagyu was gone? Priceless." They felt safe. They had managed the entire flight without incident, without complaint, and without anyone in authority observing their subtle, continuous abuse of power. To them, this was simply another anecdote about the wrong sort of passenger ending up in the premium cabin. David, meanwhile, was gathering his things, still feeling the sting of the journey. He had been polite and quiet, but the experience had fundamentally undermined the celebratory nature of his trip. He was grateful for the space, but the service had been isolating. He was ready to get off the plane and start his life at Columbia. The plane touched down smoothly at JFK and taxied toward the terminal. The captain's voice came over the PA, announcing their arrival at Gate 14. But as the aircraft reached the gate, there was a strange, prolonged pause. The engines shut down, but the air bridge did not move. The captain's voice returned, sounding slightly strained. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the brief delay. We are currently experiencing a slight technical issue with the air bridge connection. We expect to be deplaning momentarily." A few grumbles rose in the cabin, but most passengers accepted the minor hiccup. David simply pulled out his textbook, resigned to waiting. In the rear of the aircraft, Chuck Sterling quickly gathered his sparse belongings. He was wearing an Atlantic Aero ID badge now, a specialized high-security badge that simply read, Operations Oversight. He was the last person off the aircraft, heading toward the forward door, but he wouldn't use the passenger air bridge. In the first-class cabin, the forward door hissed open, and the air bridge finally connected. The announcement for deplaning sounded. Sarah Jenkins, already at the door with David, offered her usual practiced farewells to the departing passengers. As David Holloway stepped off the plane, he was intercepted by a serious-looking, uniformed ground supervisor named Dennis. "Mr. Holloway, welcome to JFK," Dennis said, his tone respectful. "We have a small surprise for you, a welcome to America. Would you mind following me briefly? It's completely private." David, confused but intrigued, nodded. Dennis quickly escorted him down a side staircase that led not to the main terminal, but to a private, security-controlled corridor, a pathway few passengers ever saw. As the remaining first-class passengers filed out, Flora Vance paused by the galley. She had placed her small notebook securely inside her carry-on, but she met Sarah Jenkins's eye for a moment. Her gaze was level and cold, devoid of the usual pleasantries. Sarah, busy ushering the last passenger out, ignored it, focused only on getting the cabin tidied. When the last passenger was off, the 3 first-class crew members started chatting about their layover plans. Suddenly, Dennis, the same ground supervisor, reappeared at the door, holding a clipboard. "Lead Flight Attendant Jenkins, Flight Attendant Stern, Flight Attendant O'Malley," he announced, his voice carrying the impersonal weight of officialdom. "I need you to gather your personal effects immediately. You are required to report to Airside Facility C for an unscheduled operational debriefing. Your shift is suspended." Sarah's professional composure vanished. "A debriefing? Dennis, what is this? We just landed. We have our check-in procedure." Dennis was unyielding. "I cannot disclose details. This is an order from the Executive Operations, immediate and non-negotiable. Please follow me. Now." He stepped aside, revealing 2 airport security officers standing silently behind him. The sight of uniformed security was enough to silence the 3 crew members. Their confidence evaporated, replaced by a sudden, sickening jolt of fear. They gathered their bags, their movements slow and uncertain. The crew was escorted down the same private corridor David had been taken through, but their destination was a small, windowless conference room in the secure Airside Facility C. They were told to wait. 10 minutes later, the door opened. A man walked in who none of them immediately recognized, yet his presence commanded absolute silence. He was followed by Robert Caldwell, the Executive VP of Operations, a man Sarah knew only from corporate videos, a figure of immense authority. Robert Caldwell spoke first, his voice sharp and utterly devoid of professional pleasantries. "Thank you for joining us. I believe you know me. This gentleman," he gestured to the quiet man in the dark suit, "is Charles Sterling." Sarah, David, and Brenda exchanged a terrified look. Charles Sterling, the CEO, the man who owned the entire company. Why was he here? And why was he in this tiny room with them? Chuck Sterling didn't sit down. He stood at the head of the long table, his expression unreadable, radiating a cold authority that made their blood run cold. "I was a passenger on Flight 347, Sterling began, his voice low but cutting. "I flew in the staff jump seat. I observed the entire flight. I witnessed your contempt for a paying customer, Mr. David Holloway, Seat 1A. Sarah tried to interject, her voice shaky. "Sir, with all due respect, there must be a misunderstanding. We were simply enforcing policy." Sterling raised a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. He didn't shout. He simply spoke over her, laying out the evidence with devastating clarity. "You called Mr. Holloway lost and assumed he was using an unauthorized pass. You joked about him asking for fried chicken in the galley. This was recorded by my tablet. You failed to offer him the standard selection of pre-departure beverages. You lied to him, David, stating the Wagyu was sold out, then immediately offered it to Mr. Finch in 3A. He looked directly at Sarah. And you, Ms. Jenkins, publicly berated a nervous young man over a satchel placement, a non-issue in the 1A suite, while ignoring the personal item placement of 2 other passengers, I noted." He leaned in, placing his hands flat on the table. "In short, you 3 violated every principle of integrity, professionalism, and non-discrimination that Atlantic Aero stands for. You judged him by his appearance and punished him for it." Sterling pulled out a single sheet of paper. "Ms. Jenkins, your personnel file indicates a final warning 4 months ago. Mr. Stern, you have 2 prior complaints regarding passenger attitude. Ms. O'Malley, your file is clean, but you were an active, laughing participant in the derogatory commentary and the subsequent deception regarding the meal service." He looked up. "Effective immediately, your employment with Atlantic Aero is terminated for gross misconduct and breach of professional trust. All benefits, flight privileges, and corporate access are revoked. Your airport passes will be surrendered here and now." The silence was broken by Brenda O'Malley beginning to weep silently. Sarah, pale and furious, found her voice. "You can't do this over one passenger. Who is he? Some CEO's son. You're ruining our careers. We have families." Sterling stared her down. "His background is irrelevant. He is a customer. You were paid to serve him with dignity, and you chose cruelty. As for ruining your careers, you did that yourselves the moment you decided to laugh at him." He turned to Robert Caldwell. "Mr. Caldwell, please ensure the paperwork is processed efficiently. They are to be escorted to the public terminal immediately." Before leaving, Charles Sterling paused at the door and delivered the final, crushing blow. "Oh, and by the way, Miss Jenkins, Mr. Stern, that satchel you mocked, inside it was the prototype code for a new, highly specialized AI security software. The very software I was flying here to finalize a billion-dollar investment deal for." David Holloway is not just a university student. He is the creator of the technology that will power our entire airport security system next year. He didn't just buy a ticket. Atlantic Aero paid for his entire trip as part of a recruitment effort to work with him. You chose to humiliate one of our most valued, incoming partners. The 3 terminated employees stood frozen. The magnitude of their error, not just moral but professional and financial, crushing them beneath its weight. While the 3 crew members were facing the crushing reality of termination in the sterile confines of Airside Facility C, David Holloway was being treated like a VIP. Ground Supervisor Dennis led him not to baggage claim, but to a discreet, plush lounge near the private jet terminal. Waiting inside was Robert Caldwell, the EVP of Operations, who greeted David with a handshake of genuine respect and enthusiasm. "David, welcome to New York. I am Robert Caldwell, and I oversee operations here at Atlantic Aero," Caldwell said warmly. "Please accept my profound apologies for the service you received on Flight 347. It was unacceptable, and I assure you it has been dealt with immediately and decisively." David, still slightly bewildered, sat down. "It's okay, sir. I understand long flights can be stressful for the crew." Caldwell shook his head firmly. "No, David, it is not okay. We observed the conduct of that crew from the moment you boarded. We expect excellence, not prejudice. Mr. Sterling, our CEO, sends his personal regards and deepest apologies. He is passionate about your work and our partnership." Caldwell then delivered the surprising news. "To start your American journey off right, we have a few things set up. First, your luggage will be delivered directly to your dorm room at Columbia. Second, our corporate driver, Mr. Peterson, is waiting to take you directly there. And third, Mr. Sterling insisted we treat you to a genuine New York experience that does not involve cold fish. We have a reservation for you at Per Se tomorrow night. It's on us." David was stunned. Per Se was one of the most famous, exclusive restaurants in the city. The contrast between the petty cruelty on the plane and this overwhelming kindness was staggering. "Mr. Caldwell, I don't know what to say. That's too much," David stammered. "It's the least we can do, David," Caldwell smiled. "We value talent and we value our partners. That ticket wasn't just a plane ride. It was the start of a business relationship. Please let this small act of recognition replace the sour taste of the flight. We look forward to seeing your AI software implemented next year." David finally understood the gravity of his situation and the magnitude of the crew's mistake. He was not just a kid with an old bag. He was a valuable asset, and the crew had spat in the face of the company's future. He left the lounge feeling restored, stepping into the waiting black luxury SUV with a sense of immense vindication. Meanwhile, back in the small facility room, the grim reality had set in. Sarah Jenkins, stripped of her professional dignity, was escorted out of the secure area by a security officer. Her airport security badge was gone, cut cleanly in half. She was now standing in the crowded, noisy public terminal, wearing her uniform, a symbol of the status and privilege she had just lost. She was disoriented. She was supposed to be heading to a 5-star hotel for her layover, not navigating a sea of strangers and crying children. Her phone rang. It was her husband, Michael. "Hey, Sarah, did you land? Is everything okay? I just got an automated email saying your corporate card was declined when I tried to book that rental car for our vacation." Sarah struggled to keep the hysteria out of her voice. "Michael, listen to me. I've been terminated. Right now. They cut my badge. It was the CEO. He was on the flight." A stunned silence followed. "Terminated? Over what? A service dispute?" "It was more than that, Michael. They said it was gross misconduct. They think we were targeting a passenger." The gravity of the Wagyu lie and the derogatory remarks settled heavily on her. Her husband's voice hardened instantly. "Sarah, your salary covered half the mortgage, the flight benefits. That's how we visited your mother every year. What did you do?" The realization that her arrogance on a single flight had jeopardized her entire family's financial stability hit her like a physical blow. Her husband hung up, demanding she call him when she was thinking straight. The shame was overwhelming. She had to take a public taxi home, wearing her Atlantic Aero uniform, the final walk of shame from the airport, where she had reigned supreme for 2 decades. David Stern handled his termination with volatile fury. He stormed out of the terminal, calling every lawyer he knew, demanding they sue for wrongful termination. But Chuck Sterling had anticipated this. As David was waiting for a ride, his phone started buzzing with notifications. He checked his social media. An hour after the plane landed, Flora Vance, the retired journalist from Seat 2C, had acted. She hadn't gone to the airline. She had gone straight to the public domain. Her post was simple, factual, and devastating. Flora Vance. "The traveling truth. To Atlantic Aero. Your first-class service on LHR JFK. 347 tonight. Was a disgrace. I witnessed lead FA Sarah Jenkins and FA David Stern engage in sustained, discriminatory cruelty toward a young black passenger in 1A. They mocked his appearance, lied to him about meal options. Wagyu was available, I saw it served moments later, and created an atmosphere of subtle harassment. This is a moral failure. For Atlantic Aero fail, master customer service, under prejudice in the air." Attached to the post was a meticulously transcribed, scanned image of her small notebook log, detailing the time, the exact nature of the slights, OJ snub, Wagyu lie, satchel shaming, and the names of the crew members. The post exploded. Within 30 minutes, it had thousands of shares and hundreds of comments demanding accountability. The story of the terminated crew was still internal, but the incident was now public and branded with their names. David's phone started ringing off the hook, not with lawyers but with reporters. He was exposed. The arrogance he displayed in the private galley was now being dissected and condemned by the digital mob. Brenda O'Malley, the youngest of the three, was paralyzed by fear. Her file had been clean, but she was actively complicit. She hadn't said the worst of the comments, but she had laughed and participated in the menu lie. She wasn't angry. She was consumed by guilt. Her termination meant she lost her flight training funding. She was 3 months away from qualifying as a pilot, a lifelong dream, funded largely by the airline's employee education program. That funding was immediately revoked. She walked away from the airport, heading to her shared layover apartment, but instead of packing, she collapsed onto the sofa. She realized that unlike Sarah and David, who were fueled by indignation, she was simply devastated by the loss of her future, a future she had deliberately sacrificed for a fleeting moment of cruel, shared amusement. She had been warned in training. One moment of unprofessionalism can destroy years of dedication. She hadn't listened. The initial wave of karma had hit, immediate financial and professional ruin coupled with public humiliation. But the consequences of their actions were only just beginning to ripple outward. Flora Vance's social media post was not just a complaint, it became a national news story. Major news outlets like the New York Times and the BBC picked up the thread, using the CEO's unexpected presence and the young man's background as a key narrative hook. CEO terminates crew mid-air after targeting tech prodigy. Flora, thrust into the spotlight, gave measured, articulate interviews, reinforcing the gravity of the crew's behavior. "It wasn't a mistake," she stated on CNN. "It was a deliberate, sustained act of judgment and humiliation. They targeted him because they thought he didn't belong." Atlantic Aero, under the direction of Charles Sterling, issued a statement within 6 hours of the landing. Atlantic Aero confirms the immediate termination of 3 personnel on Flight 347 for gross misconduct and violation of our core values of respect and non-discrimination. The unacceptable treatment of a highly valued passenger, Mr. David Holloway, was witnessed firsthand by our CEO, Mr. Charles Sterling. We are taking swift action to reaffirm that prejudice has no seat on our aircraft. The public response was overwhelming support for the CEO's decisive action, cementing the narrative of the terminated crew members as the villains. Sarah Jenkins spent the next week frantically applying for every hospitality and service job she could find, from hotel concierge to private dining manager. Her resume was impressive: 20 years of managing a premium cabin, fluency in 3 languages, and high-level training in crisis management. Normally, she would be snapped up immediately, but every application was met with silence, or worse, a polite but firm rejection after the initial screening. She finally landed an interview with a boutique luxury cruise line, Ocean Elite, for the position of guest services director. She dressed impeccably, practiced her answers, and felt a surge of professional hope. The interview started well, focusing on her experience. Then, the HR director, a sharp-eyed woman named Ms. Hayes, put a tablet on the table, opened to a news article detailing the Flight 347 incident. "Ms. Jenkins," Ms. Hayes said, her voice dropping. "We did a final background check, and this incident came up immediately. We operate in the luxury space, where discretion and genuine warmth are paramount. Your CEO publicly stated you engaged in gross misconduct. Can you explain why we should hire a director whose last employer, the most prestigious in air travel, fired her for being openly contemptuous of a paying client?" Sarah, tears welling up, tried to minimize the incident. "It was a misunderstanding. We were tired. The passenger was non-responsive to safety instructions. It was blown out of proportion." Ms. Hayes closed the tablet. "We are aware of the published log from the other passenger. We cannot risk our brand on tired misunderstandings that involve lying to a guest about a meal and mocking them in the service area. You are, quite simply, too much of a liability. We wish you luck." Sarah walked out, the realization dawning. The incident was an indelible stain. Her name, associated with prejudice and termination at the highest level, was a digital scar that automatically filtered her out of any reputable luxury service role. The $100,000 annual salary she had relied on was gone, replaced by zero income, and the mortgage payments were looming. David Stern, consumed by anger, decided to fight back against the public shaming. He hired a public relations firm to craft a narrative about overzealous corporate tyranny and racial profiling in reverse. He even attempted to set up a paid interview on a minor talk show. However, his efforts only made things worse. During one heated online exchange with a commenter, David, using a pseudonym, but easily traced by digital detectives, made a series of racially charged remarks, demonstrating his underlying prejudice. The comments were screenshotted and immediately attached to the Flight 347 story. The media, already eager for a clean narrative, used the screenshots as definitive proof of the CEO's original assertion. David was not just a terminated flight attendant, he was now publicly branded as a bigot. His karma was twofold. First, the loss of his high-paying job, and second, the immediate loss of all social standing. He lost his apartment as his roommates, concerned about the negative attention, asked him to leave. He ended up taking a low-wage overnight security job in a warehouse, a job where he had no contact with the public, a cruel irony for a man whose identity was built on his social charm. Brenda O'Malley, the youngest, bore the quietest but most crippling burden. She owed a significant sum on her pilot training course, which had been deferred and partially paid by Atlantic Aero, contingent upon continued employment. When the termination was finalized, the school demanded the full, immediate repayment of the employee-funded portion, nearly $30,000, which she simply did not have. Her father, Mr. Richard O'Malley, a kind, working-class man who had always supported her pilot dream, had co-signed the training loan. When the debt collector called, the pressure fell squarely on him. Brenda's guilt was now compounding into a crushing weight of familial responsibility. She had not only destroyed her own future, she had financially endangered her father. She called Sarah, desperate for support or advice. Sarah, wallowing in her own financial crisis and bitterness, simply snapped, "Don't call me, Brenda. We're all in this mess because of our own stupidity. Go figure it out yourself." The final, cruel twist of their karma was the complete breakdown of their shared professional bond. They were now isolated, facing their separate disasters with no one to blame but themselves. The laughter in the galley had faded into the silence of their ruined lives. 6 months had passed since the incident on Flight 347. David Holloway's life in New York had flourished. He was thriving at Columbia. His AI security prototype, now rebranded Sentinel, was being fast-tracked for implementation at Atlantic Aero, and he was being hailed in tech circles as a rising star. His success was not simply a twist of fate. It was the result of talent and the opportunities his first-class ticket, ironically, helped unlock. He had used the Atlantic Aero partnership to secure venture capital, and he was now running a small, successful startup from his campus lab. David had largely put the flight experience behind him. It was a strange, unpleasant memory, quickly overshadowed by his professional achievements. He knew the crew had been terminated, and he felt a quiet sense of justice, but he bore no personal malice. He was focused on the future. Sarah Jenkins was living a life unrecognizable from her previous existence. She had lost her house to foreclosure after failing to keep up with the mortgage. Her husband, Michael, filed for separation, unable to cope with the financial ruin and the social stigma. She was now renting a cramped, overpriced studio apartment near a major transportation hub, working 2 jobs. Her primary job was managing the service counter at a large, bustling quick-service restaurant, a job she took because it was non-discriminatory and simply needed warm bodies. She was paid minimum wage, wore a synthetic polyester uniform she despised, and dealt with a constant stream of demanding, often rude customers. Every day was a crushing humiliation. She went from being the sovereign of the first-class cabin, dictating service standards to the elite, to meekly asking customers, "Would you like to supersize that order, ma'am?" Her once meticulously maintained appearance had faded under the stress and long hours. The bitterness had consumed her, replacing her professional pride with a raw, ugly resentment toward the world she believed had unfairly cast her out. David Stern's situation was even more dire. He had been fired from the warehouse security job after a confrontation with a shift manager. His attempts to start an online business failed, and his toxic social media presence had made him a pariah even among his former friends. He was cycling through menial, cash-in-hand jobs. He lived out of a dilapidated motel room, fueled by a corrosive mix of self-pity and anger. He would often loiter near the airport terminal, watching the Atlantic aeroplanes take off, fantasizing about the life that had been stolen from him. His entire identity, built on the prestige of his airline uniform and the perceived superiority it granted him, was shattered. He was just another face in the crowd, anonymous and forgotten, exactly the opposite of the high-status life he desperately craved. Brenda O'Malley was the only one who found a different path, though not without immense pain. Forced to confront her actions, she confessed to her father how she had laughed at David Holloway. Mr. O'Malley, though deeply disappointed, helped her refinance the pilot training debt, saving him and her from financial ruin. In return, Brenda had to abandon her flight dream for now. She took a job working with a local community outreach program, helping young people from disadvantaged backgrounds apply for university scholarships, a stark contrast to her previous life. The work was fulfilling, and the humility of her new position was slowly chipping away at her arrogance. She was paying her karmic debt by serving the demographic she had once mocked. She was the only one who seemed to understand the connection between her actions and the consequences. 6 months after the fateful flight, Sarah Jenkins was working a particularly busy evening shift at the quick-service restaurant located near a major financial district office block in Manhattan. A man walked up to her counter, speaking into his expensive Bluetooth headset, clearly absorbed in a high-level conversation. "Yes, Robert, the Sentinel prototype is performing better than projected. I'll send you the final security report after this meeting. We're going to revolutionize airport flow." Sarah looked up to take his order. Standing on the other side of the counter, impeccably dressed in a tailored blazer, confident and radiating success, was David Holloway. He was no longer the nervous teenager with the old satchel. He was a powerful young executive. Their eyes met. David paused his conversation mid-sentence. His expression registered a flash of recognition, not malice, but a quiet, almost sad realization. Sarah, however, felt a wave of scalding shame and immediate, desperate panic. She saw not the successful man she had wronged, but the symbol of her downfall. She was wearing a paper hat and a grease-stained uniform. He was discussing a billion-dollar deal. David quietly ended his call. He looked at her, and, with a level voice that held no aggression, only simple acknowledgement, he said, "Sarah, how are you?" Sarah could barely speak. She swallowed, her throat tight with humiliation. "Mr. Holloway, I'm fine. What can I get for you?" David didn't order. He placed a single, crisp $100 bill on the counter, more than she earned in 3 hours, and slid it toward her. "I won't take up your time, Sarah. I just wanted to tell you something. I hope that you, David, and Brenda are finding peace and learning from the past. Every single thing that happened to me after that flight, my contract, the funding, the entire Sentinel project, was the direct result of the service I received. Your actions did not diminish my worth. They simply created a direct path to my success and secured my partnership with the airline. He looked directly into her eyes, delivering the final, crushing blow of hard karma. Your laughter was the loudest catalyst I ever had. Thank you for showing me what true privilege looks like. The privilege of not needing to look down on others. He nodded once, turned, and walked out without waiting for a reply. Sarah Jenkins stood there, staring at the $100 bill. It wasn't a tip. It was a final, damning payment on a debt she could never repay. She hadn't just lost her job. She had inadvertently orchestrated the rise of the man she mocked, while her own life collapsed into the anonymity she had once scorned. The hard karma had landed, absolute and final. The story of Flight 347 is a profound lesson in the true cost of arrogance. Sarah Jenkins, David Stern, and Brenda O'Malley believed they operated in a vacuum of privilege, where the rules applied only to the passengers they deemed worthy. They saw David Holloway not as a valuable client, but as an easy target for their petty malice, assuming his quiet demeanor signified powerlessness. Their error was catastrophic. Their cruelty was witnessed by two key figures: a meticulous journalist, Flora Vance, who documented their every slight, and their own CEO, Charles Sterling, who acted as the silent, final judge. Their immediate termination was the first wave of professional karma. The subsequent waves were the most devastating. The public shaming by Flora's viral post, the digital scar that rendered them unemployable in the luxury service industry, and the crushing financial ruin that followed. They lost their homes, their marriages, and their sense of self-worth. Their shared laughter in the galley gave way to isolated despair. The ultimate twist of hard karma was the confirmation, 6 months later, that their spiteful actions had directly fueled David Holloway's ascent. By confirming his importance to the airline and the value of his technology, their attempts to diminish him only amplified his success. The final meeting at the quick service counter was the ultimate reversal of fortune. The sovereign of first class was serving fast food to the prodigy she had tried to starve of a meal. David, by refusing to take the bait and instead offering a powerful, final lesson in grace and success, proved that true worth is not determined by a seat number, but by character. The crew learned, too late, that in a connected world, no act of malice, no matter how subtle, goes unseen or unpunished. What started as a story of simple discrimination ended as a crushing case study in instant, hard-hitting karma. Sarah, David, and Brenda lost everything because they forgot one fundamental rule of service, of business, and of life. Character is the only true first-class ticket. Their arrogance gave rise to David Holloway's greatest success and secured their total ruin. If this story of justice served and fate reversed resonated with you, and if you believe that people who treat others with disrespect should always face the consequences, then you need to be part of our community. Hit that like button right now. It helps us bring more powerful, real-life drama to you. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this lesson. And the most important thing, subscribe and click the notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into stories of unbelievable karma. Tell us in the comments, what was the most shocking part of this downfall?